My name is Rachel Monroe, and I was supposed to die 3 years ago, trapped in my childhood bedroom surrounded by smoke, screaming into a phone while the fire climbed the walls. The windows wouldn't open, they were nailed shut. I watched my parents drive away as the flames rose. That night, I realized the truth. They didn't just want to protect me, they wanted me gone. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to be abandoned by the people who raised you, stay with me because this story isn't just about surviving a fire. It's about surviving a family. The smell of smoke doesn't leave you, not really. Even now, years later, it returns at random, slipping into my lungs without warning, as if my body remembers what my mind tries to forget. The night of the fire is a tangle of sound and sensation. The hiss of burning wood, the heat licking the walls, my own voice, ragged and raw, pleading through a phone that barely worked. But the thing I remember most clearly isn't the fire itself. It's the moment I realized I couldn't get out, that the windows were sealed, that the people who were supposed to love me had locked me in. To understand that moment, you have to understand the world I came from. From the outside, my family was the definition of picture perfect. We lived in a beautifully maintained colonial-style home in a quiet upper-middle-class suburb in Oregon. Our lawn looked like it belonged in a landscaping magazine. My mother, Evelyn, was the kind of woman people trusted immediately. Warm smile, soft voice, always volunteering at church, at school, at food drives. She dressed modestly, baked muffins for the neighbors, and never raised her voice. People called her an angel. My father, Daniel, was quieter. He worked long hours at an insurance firm, kept to himself, but always had a polite nod for the mailman and a steady hand when teaching kids how to throw a baseball. I was their only child, and by most appearances, their most precious possession. From the time I could talk, I was reminded how special I was. "We only get one shot to raise a daughter, right?" my mum would say, brushing my hair before bed. "The world is dangerous. It's our job to protect you." I believed her at 5, 6, even 8 years old. I wore that protection like a badge. I followed the rules. I didn't argue. I did as I was told because I thought that's what good daughters did. But even then, something felt off. There were rules and then there were rules. I wasn't allowed to open my bedroom window, not even on warm spring days. "Drafts make you sick," my mother would say, snapping the lock shut. She'd triple-check it every night. When I was 10, I tried to push it open anyway, just to feel the breeze. It didn't budge. At the time, I thought maybe it was painted shut. Later, I'd understand it had been sealed on purpose. Friends were allowed over sometimes, but only the ones my mother had vetted. She needed to meet their parents first. She needed to see their grades. If someone had divorced parents or wore too much makeup, they were deemed unsuitable influences. I remember once in 3rd grade inviting a girl named Lily over after school. She was sweet, curious, a little loud, but I liked her. When she arrived, my mother smiled through tight lips, offered her a snack, and then spent the next 20 minutes monitoring us from the hallway. Later, she told me Lily wouldn't be coming back. "She has a defiant spirit," Mum said gently. "We don't want that rubbing off on you." At the time, it didn't seem cruel. It felt like love, just sharp-edged love. Even my toys were curated. Dolls with modest clothing, books without fantasy or dark themes, movies approved only after my mother watched them herself. "No need for magic or monsters," she'd say. "The real world is challenging enough." Looking back, I realized how small my world had become without me even noticing. Still, I didn't question it, not really. I told myself I was lucky, that I had parents who cared, that the restrictions were just their way of showing love. The other kids, with their messy houses, chaotic families, and too much freedom, they didn't know how good they had it. That's what I thought. That's what I was taught to think. But sometimes late at night, lying in my pristine bed in my perfectly arranged room, I'd hear laughter from the house next door, siblings arguing playfully, a mum yelling for someone to turn down the TV. And I'd feel a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain, A yearning for something I didn't have a name for. Freedom. I remember the orange glow before I remember the heat. The walls of my bedroom flickered like candlelight shadows, distorted by smoke. I coughed once, then again, sharp, dry. My eyes burned, my throat clenched. I stumbled toward the window, instincts kicking in, reaching for the latch I'd tried so many times before. I pulled hard. It didn't move. I pulled again, harder. Still nothing. That's when I saw it. Thick, glossy lines around the frame. Sealant. Someone had began driving me to and from school every day. "We just want to make sure you're safe," he said, though his eyes never quite met mine. If I stopped to tie my shoe or said goodbye to a friend a few seconds longer than usual, my mother's phone would ring within minutes. That's when I found out about the tracking app. My phone, a gift for my 14th birthday, came pre-installed with Guardian Watch, an app that sent live updates on my location every 10 seconds. If I wandered even slightly off route, she'd call. "Why are you behind the library instead of the front entrance?" she asked once, her voice deceptively calm. I had taken a shortcut through the courtyard. She made me delete the shortcut on my map app. Privacy was a myth in our home. Even my bedroom wasn't mine. I started noticing odd clicks and whir when I moved around, soft mechanical sounds that didn't belong. One day, while dusting the bookshelf, I knocked over a decorative flower vase and noticed a small black lens tucked behind it. My stomach dropped. A camera. I found another in the smoke detector, one in the hallway vent. Even my bathroom mirror had been replaced with a fog-proof smart mirror that I later discovered had a built-in mic. My life was an experiment in total control. And the cruelest part, they'd built it so gradually that I didn't realize what was happening until I was too deep inside it to fight back. At school, I began noticing how different my classmates were. They walked freely through the halls, laughing, teasing, making plans their parents didn't need to pre-approve. They argued with teachers without fear of punishment at home. They joined teams, skipped lunch, forgot assignments, and no one called them unstable. They were living. I was being preserved like a fragile antique under glass. And yet every time I tried to express these feelings, I'd get the same concerned tilt of the head, the same soft voice. "Rachel, you know how your anxiety gets. Don't spiral. Everything we do is for your protection." Protection. It didn't feel like protection anymore. It felt like chains. The camera in the bathroom was the tipping point. I was 16. One morning while getting ready for school, I noticed the new light fixture my father had installed a few weeks prior. It was sleek, modern, out of place in our otherwise dated home. I hadn't questioned it before, but that morning, something about the way it hummed softly as I brushed my teeth felt wrong. I climbed onto the counter and unscrewed the cover, and there it was, a pinhole camera embedded into the light casing, angled directly at the shower. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't think. Then I climbed down, screwed the cover back on, and locked myself in my bedroom. The bile rising in my throat. They were watching me even in the bathroom. Every inch of my life had been invaded. What kind of parents did that? My heart pounded as I flipped through my phone, desperate to text someone to tell anyone what I'd found. But when I opened my messaging app, the inbox was nearly empty. Not blank, but scrubbed. Messages from friends like Lily and Sarah, who I hadn't seen in months, were missing. Entire conversation threads gone. Contacts I knew I'd added had vanished. At first I thought it was a glitch, but deep down I knew my mother. She had my passcode. She'd always had it just in case of emergencies. She told me it was normal that good families shared everything. "Trust builds safety," she'd say. She must have been checking my phone regularly, deleting anything she didn't approve of, filtering my reality. Twist after twist unraveled that week. The third blow came when I accidentally dropped a pen behind the dresser. I bent down to retrieve it and noticed a metal fixture bolted into the floor. A latch, faint but visible, set flush with the hardwood. I scratched at it until it lifted slightly, revealing a hidden lock mechanism. It was a floor latch, and it only worked from the outside. Someone could lock my room from underneath. I hadn't even known that was possible. I waited until nightfall, then crept downstairs and quietly stepped into the basement. I searched along the ceiling below my room, and there it was, the matching latch plate, fresh screws, a padlock hanging loose, ready to be snapped shut. I didn't confront them, not yet. What was the point? My reality had already started to unravel, and worse, the gaslighting hadn't stopped. "You've been acting so emotional lately," Mum said at dinner, placing my plate down with her usual practiced grace. "Maybe it's hormones or the new vitamins. Should we schedule another doctor's visit?" I stared at her, stunned by how seamlessly she played her role. She still called me sweetheart, still brushed my hair with gentle hands, still used the same soft tone that lulled me to sleep as a child. And all the while she was stealing pieces of my autonomy, one calculated step at a time. I looked at my father, hoping, just once for eye contact, for confirmation that he saw what was happening. He didn't look up. He never looked up. That hurt more than the cameras, more than the locked floor, because part of me still believed he might save me, that maybe he wanted to. Later that night, I sat in bed, heart aching under the weight of everything I'd discovered. I stared at my phone, not to call anyone, but to look at it, at the symbol of what freedom could have been. I thought about how easily they'd erased my connections, rewritten my story, isolated me without bars. The chains weren't made of iron. They were made of kindness, of concern, of perfectly baked castles and gentle phrases, like "for your own good." And that was what made them so impossible to escape. Because to the rest of the world, my parents were saints. But in the corners of my life, corners filled with surveillance, silence, and sealed windows, they were something else entirely. It started with a pill, small, white, unmarked. My mother handed it to me one morning with my usual glass of orange juice. "It's just a vitamin," she said, smiling as always. "Dr. Hole recommended it. Helps with your focus." I hesitated. "I don't remember seeing a doctor." She tilted her head, her expression full of practiced concern. "You've been really overwhelmed lately, sweetheart. Don't you remember last week you had that episode after geometry class? You were shaking." I frowned. I didn't remember shaking. I didn't remember seeing anyone named Hole. But her voice was so certain, so comforting. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I was overwhelmed. Maybe she was right. So I took the pill. By the end of the week, I was taking 2 in the morning, 1 at night, then 4 total, then 5. And slowly everything blurred. I started falling asleep in class. My vision would go fuzzy when I tried to focus on words. Reading assignments felt like swimming through wet cement. I forgot simple things: where I'd put my backpack, what class came next, who I was supposed to meet at lunch. "My teachers noticed Rachel's been a bit off lately," one said in a conference. "She's always been top of the class, but her performance has dipped." "She's under a lot of pressure," my mother answered calmly. "We're managing it with medical support." I wasn't allowed in the room for that meeting. I only heard about it after my grades started to slip. Slowly at first, then all at once. I couldn't keep up with assignments. I'd stare at the screen for hours, struggling to form coherent thoughts. My once perfect essays turned into half-finished drafts. One teacher accused me of copying from an old paper because she couldn't believe how bad mine was. And my friends, they started drifting away. It wasn't just the fog I was living in. It was them too. They'd waved from across the hallway, but they stopped inviting me to hang out. They stopped texting. Or maybe they did, and I just didn't see the messages. It was hard to tell anymore what was real and what wasn't. Lily pulled me aside one day after class. "Hey," she said cautiously, "are you okay? You seem off." I blinked at her, trying to form a sentence, but the words came slow and slurred. "I'm tired, Iné," she frowned. "Are you on something?" Before I could answer, the bell rang and she walked away. It wasn't until that night that I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt fully awake, the last time I'd laughed, the last time I'd felt anything clearly. At dinner, my mother placed a pill next to my water glass. "What is it?" I asked, my voice flat. "Same as always," she said. "It's helping, isn't it? You've been calmer." I looked at my father. He didn't speak. He never did when it came to the pills. Just focused on his mashed potatoes, like they might save him. I didn't take the pill that night. I hid it in a tissue, flushing it down the toilet when no one was watching. The next morning, I woke up feeling clearer than I had in weeks. But it came with a cost, a pounding headache, and a tremor in my hands that made brushing my teeth difficult. Withdrawal, I realized later. Still, I skipped the morning dose too, hit it again, and by the third day, I could really think something was wrong, more wrong than I'd let myself believe. These weren't vitamins, they were sedatives, and my own parents were the ones drugging me. The day I confirmed the truth about the pills, something inside me snapped, and something else clicked into place. I'd always believed that my mother's control had limits. Harsh, yes, overbearing, absolutely, but not malicious. That belief died the moment I called Dr. Hole's office, or rather, tried to. There was no Dr. Hole in our town, not at the clinic, my mother claimed, not at the hospital, not in the state registry. I spent hours secretly searching through school computers and public directories. Nothing. No license, no office, no record of any consultation under my name. He didn't exist. I remember sitting there in the school library, hands shaking as I stared at the screen. My heartbeat thudded in my throat. The doctor she'd sworn was helping me was fiction. My mother had been giving me medication under a forged name. That same day, when I returned home early from school pretending to be sick, I found the key to a locked drawer in her desk. I'd seen her use it before, always careful, always guarded. I waited until she was out running errands. My father was at work. Inside the drawer was a small binder labeled Behavioral Notes. R.M. Rachel Monroe, me. Every page detailed my progress, my symptoms, my episodes. I flipped through it stunned. She'd written that I exhibited paranoia, compulsive lying, emotional volatility, and delusions of persecution. She'd even documented auditory hallucinations. All lies. On one page dated 6 weeks before, she'd scribbled something that made my blood run cold. "If we can't keep her calm with the current dosage, we'll have to increase. She's too aware. If she gets away, everything we've built falls apart." And beneath that, in bolder handwriting underlined twice, "If we don't keep her controlled, she will turn on us." I didn't even feel my knees hit the floor. I just sat there stunned, the papers shaking in my hands. It wasn't about protecting me. It never had been. It was about preserving control, maintaining an image, keeping me docile. And now that I was getting older, resisting more, they were scared of what? That I'd leave, speak out, tell the truth. And then came the final twist. At the very back of the drawer was another notebook, older, less organized. My mother's handwriting was messier there, almost frantic. There were notes from when I was younger, more reflective than strategic. As I skimmed them, one entry stood out, surrounded by red ink and underlines. "Daniel threatened to report me today. Said I'm being too harsh, too paranoid. He doesn't understand. If I lose her, I lose everything. I told him if he tries to interfere again, I'll go to the police. I'll tell them he touched her. That'll shut him up." I stopped breathing. My father had tried to protect me, at least once, and my mother had weaponized the worst kind of lie to silence him. He hadn't helped me since, not once. But now I understood why. He hadn't just been passive. He'd been terrified of her, of what she could destroy. And I was the pawn in the middle of it all. I packed the journals back quickly, returned the key, and sat on my bed for hours in silence. Everything I'd feared was true and worse. They weren't just misguided parents trying too hard. They were calculated, coordinated, and capable of destroying. Not just my future, but my past, rewriting it in their version of events, backed by forged notes, fake doctors, and fear. I looked around my room at the soft pastel walls, the perfect bookshelf, the bedspread chosen by my mother. It felt like a dollhouse, and I was the doll she'd built. I didn't plan the first escape perfectly. I didn't have time. After discovering the forged records and reading my mother's chilling journals, something in me shifted. I couldn't wait. I couldn't sleep knowing what she was capable of, knowing that every pill, every rule, every smile was part of a larger web meant to break me. So I acted. That night after dinner, I pretended to take my evening pills and excused myself to bed early. I'd spent weeks loosening the window frame with a butter knife, careful not to damage it in a way that would raise suspicion. My room sat above the garage, and beneath my window was a narrow ledge, just wide enough to stand on if I was careful. I dressed in layers, black hoodie, jeans, sneakers. I stuffed a small backpack with the few essentials I had. $20 hidden from lunch money, a granola bar, my old student ID, and the prepaid phone I'd hidden inside a hollowed-out dictionary. The moment the house fell silent, I made my move. The window creaked slightly as I pushed it open. I winced, heart racing, but the house remained still. I swung my legs out onto the ledge. The night air was sharp, cool, freeing. For the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something that was mine. I climbed down the trellis slowly, painfully, and dropped to the lawn. I only made it 3 blocks. A car pulled up alongside me, dark, silent, and before I could react, my father stepped out. No yelling, no dramatics, just a resigned look and a simple, "Get in the car, Rachel." I froze. I could have run, should have run, but I was tired, heartbroken, and some small part of me still hoped, foolishly, that maybe he'd come to help. Maybe he'd seen what I saw. Maybe he would take my hand and drive away from all of it. But he didn't. He drove me home in silence, knuckles white on the steering wheel. My mother was waiting at the door, phone in hand, fake tears already smeared across her cheeks. "She's not well," she said to the police dispatcher on the line. "She escaped during an episode. She's been so unstable lately. We've been trying to get her help." I stood in the entryway, numb, watching her spin a story so convincing, so detailed, it didn't even sound like a lie. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't find my voice. The officer who arrived, Officer Bain, was kind enough but skeptical. I tried to explain what was happening. I told him about the pills, the cameras, the journals. But my mother was one step ahead. "She does this," she said, stroking my hair like I was 6 again. "She's confused. The things she says, they're part of the condition. She's been making up stories for months. You should have seen her at school. Delusional, paranoid." She handed him a folder of fabricated medical records. He flipped through them and nodded solemnly. I was 17, old enough to drive, old enough to vote in a year, old enough to know I wasn't crazy, but not old enough apparently to convince anyone that I was sane. The officer gave her a sympathetic nod and left. That night, a new lock appeared on my bedroom door, this time on the outside. I wasn't allowed to leave without permission. Bathroom trips were monitored, meals were left outside my door, my phone disappeared. My computer, too. I was a prisoner in my own home. And to everyone else, I was just a troubled girl, lucky to have such caring parents looking after me. Confinement changed the way I noticed things. When all you have is 4 walls, you start studying every crack in the paint, every creak in the floorboard, every shadow that doesn't quite make sense. That's how I found the camera. Not the ones my mother had hidden, not the obvious ones tucked into vents or behind bookshelves. This one was different, smaller, discreet, tucked behind the baseboard heater in the hallway across from my room. It didn't fit the pattern of the others. And when I traced the wire behind the wall panel, it didn't lead to the usual DVR box my mother used. It led to my father's study. I waited until the house was empty. My mother had taken a mental health break to the church garden club. My father was home, but distracted, muttering to himself while reorganizing old tax files. I slipped into his study, heart pounding, and found the second DVR hidden behind a filing cabinet. The footage was different. It wasn't focused on me, it was on her. Clips of my mother pacing late at night, muttering things under her breath, her slamming doors, her speaking to herself in the kitchen with a cold, flat voice, and then worse, her in my room while I slept, adjusting things, holding a pill bottle in one hand and a camera in the other, filming me. She was documenting her own delusion or trying to make it real, and my father. He had been recording her not to protect me, to protect himself. I confronted him that night. "Why do you have your own surveillance?" I asked, voice shaking. He didn't deny it. He didn't even look surprised. She said, "If I ever contradicted her, she'd tell people I hurt you," he said softly. "She's been saying it for years, that if I ever crossed her, she'd ruin me. Why didn't you help me?" His eyes filled with tears. "Because I'm a coward, Rachel. I didn't respond. What was there to say? He wasn't a monster, but he wasn't a savior either. And I was still alone. Except maybe not entirely, Lauren. She lived 2 houses down, a night shift nurse. I'd seen her sometimes early mornings, tired eyes, coffee in hand. Occasionally she waved when I was allowed in the backyard for 5 supervised minutes of fresh air. 5 minutes. That's all I ever got. One day, while I sat on the porch under my mother's gaze, Lauren called out, "Nice weather today, huh?" Before I could answer, my mother stepped between us. "Rachel's not feeling well today. Best if she doesn't talk." But Lauren kept watching. She noticed things. My lack of expression, the way I flinched at sudden sounds, how I never left the house, how my mother stood too close. That gave me an idea. That night, I retrieved the emergency phone I had hidden inside the vent. I hadn't used it since my failed escape. The battery was low. I had no charger, but it still worked. I typed a message. "My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm being held in my home. I think they're going to hurt me. Please watch for me. Please help me." I folded the note around the phone and tucked it behind a loose board in the backyard fence where Lauren walked her dog every morning. The next day, I saw the board had been moved slightly, and 2 days later, there was a small folded piece of paper in the same spot. "I believe you. Tell me how I can help." Hope, sharp, blinding hope, surged through me like fire, but with it came fear. If Lauren could see me, they could too. The stakes had never been higher. Every movement, every glance, every word was a risk. But for the first time in years, I wasn't entirely alone. And that changed everything. I woke to the sound of hammering. It was close. Too close. Not like the distant echo of roof repairs or someone fixing a fence outside. This was inside the house, just beyond my door. The rhythm was deliberate. One sharp strike, then another, then a pause, then again. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear over the blood rushing in my ears. Another bang, another pause. I tiptoed toward my bedroom door and pressed my ear to the wood. The hallway light leaked through the small gap beneath. Shadows passed, then the unmistakable sound of a toolbox being dragged across the floor. I didn't dare open the door. There was a lock on the outside now, but I crouched low and peeked through the crack. My father was kneeling beneath the hallway window. He held a hammer in one hand, a box of nails beside him. His movements were calm, efficient, methodical in a way that suggested this wasn't new to him. I watched in frozen horror as he drove a nail into the window frame. Then another and another, my breath caught in my throat. The realization hit like a punch to the chest. They weren't just keeping me under surveillance, they were sealing me in. The next morning, I waited until my mother brought breakfast. She always left the tray just inside the door and stepped back like she was feeding an animal in a cage. "Mom," I said before she could leave. She paused, her eyes bright, alert. "Yes, sweetheart." I heard Dad working last night on the windows. She tilted her head, smile unwavering. "Just some insulation work. It's getting cold again. It's spring." She blinked. The night still dropped below 50. "You're sensitive to drafts, remember?" I swallowed hard. "What if there's a fire?" She didn't miss a beat. "Then we'll come get you." My voice cracked. "What if you're not home? We always are." I stared at her, desperate to see a crack in the performance, some shred of guilt or hesitation. But there was none. Just that same serene mask, her voice low, smooth, rehearsed. "Everything we do is for your safety. We're not the enemy, Rachel." She stepped out, locking the door behind her. I sat down beside my window and touched the glass. It didn't move. I traced my fingers along the edge and felt it. Small, uneven ridges where the frame met the wall. I peeled back the curtain and found them nails, fresh silver, one every few inches, and near the edges the glossy shimmer of industrial sealant. They'd made sure it couldn't be opened, couldn't be broken, couldn't be used to escape. The rest of the day blurred. I don't remember what I ate or if I even spoke again. I remember pacing the room like a caged animal, circling the furniture, checking the closet, the vent, the light fixtures, every point of contact with the outside world. My father's secret camera still blinked softly from the hallway, the one he thought would protect him. But there was no camera for me. No one was coming. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, knees pulled to my chest, the silence pressing in like a second skin. Even the house felt different, heavier, more closed off. I listened for voices, movement, any sign of life beyond my door. But the house was quiet, dead quiet, and I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to believe until then. They were preparing for something, not just to control me, not just to sedate me, to eliminate me, maybe not with their own hands. Maybe they were still too scared to cross that line. But if something were to happen, if the house caught fire, or there was an accident, or if I simply disappeared quietly in the night, no one would know. No one would question it because I was already sick, already unstable, already labelled and dismissed by everyone who might have helped me. I had no proof, only gut instinct, only dread, and the memory of my father, hammer in hand, sealing the windows shut slowly, carefully, like he was building a coffin from the inside out. It was almost 3 o'clock a.m. when I heard their voices. Muffled, but sharp. Not the ordinary kind of late-night talk. This was different, urgent, intentional. My parents rarely spoke to each other for long stretches anymore, but something about that night after the windows were sealed kept them awake. I moved quietly to the door and pressed my ear to the wood. "She's slipping," my mother said, her voice tight. "The meds aren't holding her like they used to." "She's just tired," my father replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "No, she's remembering too much, not staying quiet. She's watching us. If we wait too long, we lose the narrative." Silence, then the sound of paper being shuffled. "I spoke to Ridgeview," she continued. "They have a room full psychiatric care long-term. I already filed the intake forms under her name." "Evelyn," my father began, "she's unstable, Daniel. The authorities won't question it. Not after what we've documented, not after the escape." There was a bitterness in her voice when she said the word. Another pause. "And the house?" he asked, already in motion. "A buyer in Salem is interested. I told the agent. We'd be relocating for health reasons. Once she's admitted, we can wrap it all up." "How long?" Will she be gone? She won't be coming back." My breath stopped. It wasn't just imprisonment anymore. It wasn't even about control. This was a rasher. They were going to institutionalize me permanently, frame it as a mental health intervention, then sell the house, vanish into a new life in another state, and leave me behind, sedated and locked away where no one would question my absence. And the way she'd said it after she's admitted sounded disturbingly close to after she's dead. I stumbled back from the door, hands trembling, bile rising in my throat. My fingers gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. I had no time. They were moving faster than I realized. The next morning, I waited for the sliver of supervised outdoor time, 5 minutes in the backyard under the watchful eye of my mother. The air was thick, my breath shaky as I paced the same 5 steps along the garden path. Lauren passed by walking her dog. She didn't wave. but she looked. That was enough. That night, I took out the emergency phone again, battery nearly gone. I typed quickly, my fingers numb with fear. They're planning to commit me permanently. They're selling the house. They're leaving. Please, if I disappear, don't believe them. I printed the message in my best handwriting on a piece of notebook paper, folded it 3 times, and sealed it inside a plastic sandwich bag. Then I wrote another note by hand. If I die, it wasn't an accident. I snuck into the hallway during a rare moment of silence and slid the note through the fence slat, the same place Lauren had once left her reply. It was my last hope. Then I returned to my room, lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. Every creak in the floorboard sounded like the beginning of the end. I imagined men in white coats, padded walls, medications I wouldn't recognize, days passing in a fog, my name forgotten. That night, I didn't sleep. The next day, my mother brought breakfast with a peculiar brightness in her tone. "Only a few more days," she said, brushing non-existent lint from her skirt. "Everything's falling into place." She didn't elaborate. She didn't have to. I sat in silence, the food untouched. They were going to bury me alive, not with dirt, but with lies, with sealed records and forged diagnoses, and a house freshly sold to strangers who'd never know my name. The worst part, it might work, because if someone like Lauren didn't step in, if no one questioned the story, they'd win. They'd disappear into a new life, leaving nothing but a troubled daughter behind. And all I'd ever be was a name in a chart, a file in a drawer, another girl who snapped. But I wasn't gone yet. Not yet. And I still had a voice, however quiet, however desperate, and I was determined to use it until the very last second. The night of the fire began like every other in that house. Silent, controlled, cold. My mother gave me the usual pills at 900 p.m., watching me swallow them with her customary blend of affection and scrutiny. But I had long since learned how to fake it. Slip the capsules under my tongue, excuse myself, and spit them into the tissue hidden in my desk drawer. It was my only defense, the only reason I could still think clearly. Plan, stay awake. I remember the sound first. A strange popping noise from downstairs, followed by a hiss, then silence. I sat up in bed, alert, heart already racing. Another pop, louder this time. Then the smell hit. Sharp, unmistakable smoke. I jumped from bed and ran to the door. It wouldn't open. I jiggled the knob, pushed, slammed my palm against it, locked, sealed from the outside like always. "Mom!" I shouted. "Dad!" No answer. Panic tightened around my chest like a vice. I dropped low to the ground, crawling toward the window. The smoke was thickening, curling under the door in long grey fingers. I tried to open the window, my last chance, but it didn't move. It never moved. I grabbed the desk chair and slammed it against the glass. The wood splintered in my hands. The glass didn't even crack. I could feel the heat now rising from the floorboards. That's when I remembered the phone, the emergency one, hidden in the vent. I crawled toward it, coughing, eyes watering, pulled the grate free and reached inside. By some miracle, the phone still had power. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "911, what's your emergency?" "There's a fire," I screamed, my voice raw. "I'm trapped in my room, second floor, 1123 Briarwood Lane. The windows are nailed shut. I can't get out." "Are there others in the home? They're gone. They left me. Please hurry." The dispatcher tried to keep me calm, asked questions I couldn't answer as the smoke thickened, filling my lungs, my eyes, my head. I fell to the floor, wrapping a shirt around my face, gagging with every breath. Somewhere outside, thought I heard sirens. Then Lauren's voice. Rachel, Rachel, are you in there? I dragged myself to the window, clawed at the sealed edges, pressed my face to the glass. Rachel, she screamed again, closer this time. The fire department's coming. Hold on. I couldn't speak. I pounded the window weakly, willing her to see me. Then a shadow, tall, helmeted, appeared on the other side. A firefighter. Another climbed a ladder. I saw their eyes widen as they saw the nails in the frame, the blackened sealant. One of them pointed, shouting something. The next moments blurred, glass shattering, arms pulling me through smoke, the sudden rush of cold air against my burning skin. I collapsed on the garage roof, coughing uncontrollably. They carried me down the ladder. I heard shouting, flashing lights, someone pressing an oxygen mask to my face, someone else calling my name. I remember only fragments, the oxygen tank, a paramedic saying her vitals are weak but stable. Lauren's tear-streaked face. And then distantly the sound of my mother's voice. Oh my God, is she okay? We were out for groceries. We didn't know. And my father's the smoke alarms. Something went wrong. I tried to speak to warn them to tell the truth, but the mask was tight against my face. My throat felt scorched. I drifted in and out of consciousness as the ambulance doors shut. The last thing I saw was a police officer turning toward my parents, his face grim. And then everything went black. The hospital ceiling tiles were beige and speckled, and I stared at them for hours, trying to convince myself I was alive. My throat was raw, lungs scorched, every breath ached, but I was breathing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than fear. I felt clarity. I remembered everything. The hammering, the smoke, the sealed window, the 911 call, and something else. Before the sirens, before the firefighters, before Lawrence screamed my name, I had seen the car through the smoke-haze glass of my bedroom window. In the moments just before the heat became unbearable, I had seen the red sedan pulling out of the driveway. My father in the driver's seat, my mother in the passenger side. Neither of them looked back. They knew I was inside, and they left anyway. The image burned brighter than the flames, more painful than the heat. I told the investigators everything as soon as I was strong enough to talk. A detective named Collins sat beside my bed taking notes. He was quiet, firm, and didn't flinch when I told him what my parents had done. We found signs of forced sealing, he said. Nails, adhesive, frame damage, all fresh. The firefighter reports back that the window was completely immobile. I nodded slowly, my voice still rasped when I tried to speak. They left me to die. He didn't contradict me. Instead, he added, the fire investigators also noted traces of accelerant gasoline spilled in the hallway and kitchen that stopped my breath cold. You think they set it? I asked, throat tightening. We can't confirm arson yet, but the pattern isn't natural. There was no electrical fault, no kitchen appliance malfunction, and the smell of gas was strong enough to be noted by the first responders. Twist after twist, truth peeling back in layers. They hadn't just locked me in. They may have tried to kill me deliberately. He paused, then opened a folder. And there's something else. He pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper, familiar handwriting, my note, the one I'd passed through the fence to Lauren. If I die, it wasn't an accident. Lauren had brought it to them the moment she followed the ambulance to the hospital. She told them everything about the messages we'd exchanged, about my daily 5-minute yard breaks, about the way my mother hovered, about the phone Lauren found in the vent bag, the warning that they planned to commit me, sell the house, and disappear. She told me they were going to get rid of her, Lauren said in her sworn statement, that they'd locked her in, that if she died, it would be murder. She said she was scared they'd make it look like an accident. I asked if she was in the room. They said yes. She came in moments later, face pale, but her eyes sharp with fire. She gripped my hand like she'd been waiting days to do so. I told them everything, she said. They believe you now. It was the first time anyone had ever said that to me. They believe you, not because I looked pitiful, not because my mother spun a story, not because I'd finally calmed down, but because the facts were finally louder than the lies. Detective Collins returned the next day. "Your parents are in custody," he said. "Officially, they're being charged with reckless endangerment, unlawful imprisonment, and pending investigation for attempted homicide. Your testimony, and Lawrence made it clear, so did the 911 call." He slid a recorder onto the table, pressed play. My voice crackled through, the speaker panicked and gasping. "There's a fire! The windows are nailed shut! Please help! They locked me in!" Then the dispatcher's calm questions, my desperate answers, the rising sound of flames, the edge of hysteria in my voice. I watched the officer's expression darken as the tape played. He didn't speak again until it ended. "No one's questioning your story now, Rachel," he said. "Not anymore. Relief came like a wave, but not without grief beneath it. Because even in that moment of vindication, I couldn't stop thinking of their faces. The calm, practiced sympathy, the way they'd looked at me as I was wheeled out on a stretcher, how easily they could fake concern, and how close they came to succeeding. But the fire had burned more than just wood and drywall. It had burned the illusion, and in its place, the truth finally stood. Charred, undeniable, and alive. Just like me, recovery wasn't linear. There were days I woke up in the hospital feeling like I could breathe for the first time in years. Then there were days when I sat staring at the wall, wondering if any of it, my escape, my survival, was real. The nurses were kind but cautious. Lauren visited daily, sometimes just to sit in silence, sometimes to read aloud from books she thought I might like. But no matter how gentle the world outside became, the inside of me remained tender, bruised, unsure. 3 weeks after the fire, my lungs began to heal. The burns on my arms faded to pale scars. I was released into temporary protective housing arranged by the state, someplace safe, private, with no locks on the outside of doors. It was the first time I'd slept behind a door that only I could close. The trial came quickly. The media got wind of it before I did. "Parents accused of trapping daughter in house fire" was the headline. The coverage painted my mother as a picture of high-functioning delusion, and my father as the quiet, complicit accomplice. People speculated, judged, whispered, but I didn't care. Let them talk. For the first time in my life, I would be heard. The courtroom was colder than I expected, clinical, wood-panelled, overly bright. I sat behind the prosecutor, dressed in plain clothes. I'd chosen myself. Hands folded tightly in my lap. Then they entered my parents. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was tied back too tight. She wore a pale beige blouse and no makeup, but her eyes still scanned the room with practiced precision. My father trailed behind her, gaze fixed to the floor. They sat across from me, no longer my captives, but defendants. The prosecution didn't need to work hard. They had everything. The 911 call, the sealed windows, the accelerant traces, Lauren's testimony, the faked medical records, and my mother's own journals recovered half-burned in a fireproof box under their bed. Still, my mother pleaded not guilty. She claimed she had only ever tried to protect me, that I was unstable, that I had misremembered everything through the lens of trauma. But the tape played, my voice, my screams, my panic. The courtroom listened. When it was my turn to speak, I stood. My voice trembled at first, but I forced myself to look straight at the jury and then at my parents. I was told my whole life that I was fragile. I began that I needed protection from the world. But what I needed protection from was them. I told them about the pills, the cameras, the fabricated diagnosis. I described how every attempt at independence was met with more restriction, more fear, more control. I spoke about the hammering outside my door, the silence that followed. And I told them about the moment I saw my parents drive away with full knowledge that their daughter was locked inside a burning house. They didn't forget me, I said. They planned it. When I sat down, there were tears in more than a few jurors' eyes. The verdict came the next day, guilty on all counts. My mother received 35 years without parole. My father got 20 with eligibility after 10 for his cooperation and eventual confession. They didn't look at me when the sentence was read. I didn't expect them to. I didn't need them to, because they no longer held anything over me. Not my story, not my identity, not my future. After the trial, I moved in temporarily with Lauren. She turned her guest room into a soft, sunlit space filled with plants and books, and a wide desk that overlooked a backyard where kids laughed and played. I want you to feel like you can open every window here, she said the day I arrived. And I did every morning. Sometimes just a crack, sometimes wide enough to feel the breeze push through the whole room because I could. And that was enough. The courtroom was supposed to be the end, the final page, but it wasn't. It was the moment everything unraveled. On the third day of testimony, my mother took the stand. Her attorney had prepared a defense built on mental fragility, claiming she'd acted out of misguided love. That she'd overprotected, yes, but never meant harm. But that's not what she said. Under oath, under pressure, something in her cracked. She was going to leave me, she said suddenly, not even prompted by a question. She was pulling away. She was becoming unrecognizable, independent. The courtroom hushed. I gave her everything, she continued, eyes wild, voice climbing. Every moment of my life was for her. I made sure she was safe, pure, untouched by the filth of the world. Her lawyer tried to interrupt, but she kept going. You don't know what it's like to be abandoned by your own child. I raised her to need me, and then she dared to grow up, to choose other people, other truths. And then her voice dropped into a whisper, but the microphone caught it perfectly. I would have rather buried her than let her walk away. Gasps. One juror covered her mouth. The judge struck the statement from the record, but the damage was done. No one could unhear it, not even me. For a moment, I felt nothing. No shock, no tears, just a quiet, grim affirmation of what I had always suspected. It wasn't about love, it was about possession. Later that day, my father, who had remained mostly silent until then, stood up from the defense table and asked to speak, unscripted, unplanned. His lawyer looked horrified. The judge hesitated, then allowed it. He turned to face the courtroom, his hands shaking. She warned me years ago, he began. She said if I ever got in the way of her parenting, she'd destroy me. Said she'd accuse me of, Things I didn't do. He swallowed. I wanted to help Rachel. I did. I even tried once. But Evelyn cornered me and told me she'd make sure I never saw my daughter again, that the courts would believe her over me, that my career, my life would be gone. He looked at me then for the first time since the fire. I let fear win. I let you suffer. I'm sorry. For a second, I saw the man I remembered from childhood, the one who told bedtime stories in soft voices, who helped me ride a bike, who gave me peppermint gum during Sunday sermons. Then he turned back and said, I accept full responsibility. I was complicit. I didn't like the match, but I helped build the prison. I couldn't bring myself to forgive him, not yet, maybe not ever, but I believed him. After the sentencing, I disappeared from the spotlight. No more cameras, no interviews, no more courtroom whispers. I needed time to rebuild, time to breathe, time to figure out who I was when I wasn't being watched. Lauren was my anchor during those first quiet months. She never pushed, just listened. We walked her dog. We sat on park benches. She taught me how to shop for groceries, how to open a bank account, how to choose my own clothes. Freedom is overwhelming when you've lived your life on a leash. Eventually, I found purpose again. I used the settlement from the civil case against my parents to launch a small foundation, Unbound, dedicated to helping others like me, survivors of familial abuse cloaked in the language of love. We offered legal aid, therapy referrals, housing resources, a hotline run by trained volunteers, many of whom had lived through the same kind of darkness. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. 1 year to the day after the fire, I moved into my own apartment. Tiny, quiet, with creaky floors and mismatched curtains, but it was mine. The first thing I did, opened all the windows, let the wind blow through the space, lifting the corners of my rug, rustling the leaves of my new plant. The air smelled like dust and potential. I sat by the biggest window, a mug of tea in my hands, sun on my face, and for the first time in my entire life, I could breathe. Please.